Okay, now that we've seen how to do validation the hard way, or at least the general way of writing our own validation code, let's look at some common cases that are so common, W3.org decided to build them into HTML. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, so there's a bunch of different things you can do. In fact, let me just glance over at a page here of different, first of all, just different input tags. If you haven't seen these before, it's good to know that you, in addition to checkbox and text, there is color, of color chooser. You can have a date input, date, time, local, email, file, number, password. These are all input forms that the browser is going to help you with. Password, it will actually not display those letters. A date, it will help format that. Maybe it'll bring a little calendar tool or something like that. It's browser dependent, and how Chrome or Explorer or Firefox treats that input tag tomorrow might change in a few months with the new version. But there are all ways to get better ways to get your input. In addition to these, the type attribute, I want to go and look at some of the other things. I'm going to focus on these ones that have this little badge saying they were added in HTML5, and I'm going to mention some of the ones that are kind of handy for validation, okay? So let's just scan down here: autocomplete, autofocus, dir name, form, form action, form encoding type, form target, height, list can be interesting. I'm not going to talk about that. Max, for a number or a date, gives the maximum value, and there's a corresponding min. So if you have a number picker, it makes sure it will validate for you that you're in a certain range, between max and min. They tend to have you choose integers, I think. Maybe you can put in real numbers. Yeah, I have to give it a try, if you care. Okay, max length. Okay, so yeah, if we have a string, we don't want to be more than 10, you can't make a password more than 6 characters long. Well, you can enforce that with a max length equals 6. Okay, max length can be used for number. That's maybe a typo. Number. It also, max length works for text inputs as well, not just number inputs. But what else? Multiple, name, pattern. We'll come back to pattern. Placeholder is a good one that puts in sort of a little default text. So I recommend browsing this list and so on. So those are the main ones there: the maximum, minimum, and max length. And those can help us. And then finally, we'll talk about pattern, which is a regular expression. You've got to give a regular expression and see if it meets that pattern. So, okay, so min-max for, min-max for numbers, max length for strings, min-length, pattern. Oh, the one that did I see that right there? There's a one, yeah, required. That one's a really helpful one. If you have a required input, then the empty string, if somebody tries putting the empty string and they try submitting, the browser will cancel the submit, and the browser will go back and show you that particular field and say, hey, this is a required field. So, okay. It doesn't mark it with a little red asterisk or something like that. I kind of wish it had some standard way of doing that itself so that we don't have to make up our own. But nonetheless. Okay, so yeah, these are just some of the different things we can do. A couple of things to mention. You don't need to validate checkbox values or the drop-down values. I mentioned this last time already in general JavaScript. You don't need to validate that on client-side checking, right? And hopefully it kind of makes sense. We need to validate server-side. Client-side, I guess you could validate it, but the only person who's going to get around that validation is somebody who's an attacker who's modifying your form and playing with it and changing it. And if they're doing that, they can change your JavaScript or turn off JavaScript entirely. So yeah, there's not much point in having JavaScript to validate that, hey, the value of the drop-down menu is one of the 6 things that were really in that menu. Client side, that's always going to be true unless it's an attacker, in which case all client side we ignore. So, okay. Don't need to validate checkbox, don't need to validate drop-downs. If a drop-down is required, well, it's a little bit tricky if you have a drop-down with 5 things in it, and it's by default, it shows the very first item, right? And you can say it's required, but yeah, one of those 5 will always be selected. So the way to get around that is often have something that says like choose one or something like that. Okay, so here's an example, or I have A and B here, choose one. And you need to go ahead for the choose one, you go ahead and put the value equal empty string, okay? And that way, if they submit it, then if they don't choose anything there, the empty string is passed, and that makes good sense. If it's required, the empty string won't be allowed to validate, and your browser will go ahead and, let me try even hitting submit, and it'll come back, and this is not my JavaScript, this is Chrome's JavaScript coming up saying, please select one of these items in here. So, okay. Great. By the way, you might think, hey, the way to have something like a choose one is simply not to include a value attribute at all for that. It doesn't quite work. If you don't include a value attribute, it will use the text of that attribute. So this option A here, if they choose that one and submit, value equals A. Yeah, so that's not enough. You need to have value equals empty string to make something a non-option, if you will. You can also look up opt group and some of the different fancier things you can do with drop-downs. But okay, okay, and then pattern. Okay, so a pattern that has to be met before submit is allowed, and we have different patterns here, but I don't have a submit button. Somehow I lost that. Okay. But yeah, so you can go ahead and have here pattern. Well, I'll try one down here. So here's a pattern. I have a pattern attribute that I put as dot angle bracket 3 plus. Or let's look at this one here. So what does that mean? Go ahead and pause the video for a second. What does that mean for a regular expression pattern? Pause. Unpause. And you're like, well, Barland, it says right above that. Yeah, okay. Let me go ahead and say submit here. And it says, oh, this one doesn't match this pattern. Dot curly bracket 3 means 3 of any character. Repeat that 1 or more times. Okay, so A, B, C, D doesn't match this. A, B, C, D, E, F will match it. Or length 3, 6, 9 will go ahead and match it. And I go ahead and submit. And now we get a different error message popping up from my browser saying, hey, this checkbox was required. I now have just a few things about regular expressions, and as I was putting things in regular expressions, things that caught me off guard. One of them being, we'll jump down to point E here. This regular expression should be the same as that regular expression, but it doesn't work. So this is just a glitch in the browser, not quite fully supporting everything validates this regular expression, whereas this one ends up doing what I wanted. Okay, what else? The pattern attribute, if you don't have something as required, then the empty string will be accepted for that input field, even if you have a pattern attribute there. Okay, so it doesn't even look at the pattern attribute if it's empty and not required, because it says, yeah, it wasn't a required field, so they don't need to have anything, they don't need to meet any pattern for that. Okay, I see that, I guess. In this case, remember in preg match, that function said, hey, here's a pattern, is there a match to this pattern anywhere inside this string? We don't have that anymore, at least not, put it this way. The way the HTML tag works, that is not the thing. It's saying, does this entire string match this pattern here? Not just, does the string contain somewhere inside of it a match? No, so does the entire string match? So you don't need to use the caret and $ to anchor things If you want to sort of say, hey, I want to just ensure that this input field contains some sort of match, we'll do your regular expression pattern and then throw a dot star on the beginning and the end to allow it to match the entire string. Okay. Remember when you're writing regular expressions in, say, Java, we sometimes had to, if we wanted a backslash in a regular expression, we had to put in 2 backslashes because that's how Java made string literals. We're not in Java, we're not in PHP, this is straight up HTML. HTML already is a string, so it's pretty easy to tell what's inside the string. Just, hey, exactly the characters inside these quotation marks. There is no escape patterns, basically. Besides escape or backslash quote and backslash backslash. But anyway, if you just want to have a backslash word, then yeah, just say backslash double in your pattern and you don't need any extra backslashes. Okay. Similarly, don't go ahead and, like in JavaScript, regular expressions had slashes around them. In PHP, they were strings, but the first and last character of the string was a backslash character. Don't do either of those. It just pattern equal, you give it right there. Okay, so those are just some things to think about. Okay, these capture a lot of the common things that can trivialize your input. Let's go and just for fun, take a few more minutes and let's take our form and add the same requirements we had before, but using HTML tags and not any other JavaScript at all. So see if we can do it and just see what issues come up when we do it. So what is your request? Text, type equal text, name equal quest. Should probably put ID equal quest. I may not need that, but separately I should say, in real life when I'm writing web forms, if I put a name down, I just knee-jerk add the ID as well. Can't hurt. Okay, and I don't need to come up with a good name. I've already come up with a decent name. Okay, so yeah, max length equal, and then something in strings here, and that will close my input tag. What does this equal? It's going to be that, I'm going to generate through this PHP echo. And here's something now that I have it in here. My tendency is now that I go ahead and put the max lengths as this max length attribute in the tag, I'm inclined to leave off any reminder text about that. Why? Let the browser do whatever it does. If the browser is going to have some little tooltip about max length, or it's going to report an error, I'll let the browser do all of that. The max length lets it have all the information it needs. And like the web page mentions, I think it's actually better to leave things to the browser and let the user see things a standard way. My site's going to just look like Amazon or any other form on any other site. Why? Because they're all using the same HTML for inputs and validation. They see the same error messages in the same way, and there's a huge value to that as opposed to doing something one-off and making it look. You might say, hey, I'm going to make my error messages cool and better, but it's better to be uniform in this data fracture thing. One of my pet peeves, I use a password manager. Any web form that has an input, a login page that uses regular HTML inputs, my password manager can autofill. Anything that has a special JavaScript that pulls up a special pane and has me type in my username and password, suddenly my password manager can't magically know what JavaScript names and so on they used. And now I'm stuck. I have to retrieve this 15-character random password and copy and paste it in, and it's much more tedious. So don't write special JavaScript if there is standard HTML to do it already. So, along the same lines of, hey, don't make a website that is a mobile app if you can just be a regular website. If you don't do anything that doesn't need to use the appness of something, don't make it an app. Okay. So what about this spaces allowed? In this case, spaces allowed, and I even had this sort of be a variable in here, and I could change it back in my constants file. Gosh, I guess that should be a pattern, all right? I should go ahead and use a pattern string and pattern equal, oops, yeah. There we are. Pattern equal, and now I should go ahead and have something here, some regular expression pattern. If it just sort of spaces are allowed, there's no problem. If spaces weren't allowed, I guess it would be, what would the pattern for that? It would be no spaces, anything but spaces. So I'm going to have a character set that says, I can use the negation of the character set after. This regular expression between the square brackets matches one character that is not a space, not negates. So yeah, and I can sort of say, hey, 0 or more of those. Now, you might say, by the way, hey, the pattern should go ahead and take care of the length. Hey, we already have separate code for the length, so I'm going to decouple the length from the pattern if I can do that easily. I think that's preferred. But now I guess I need PHP to say, if space is allowed, use this pattern, otherwise maybe don't use a pattern at all. Okay. Yeah, and I could do that, have a little if statement in here. But you know, part of me, I'm going to leave this now, part of me sort of thinks, what was the constants file called? Form0 validated constants. Part of me thinks, you know, instead of having spaces allowed, I might go ahead and change this or do something a little bit different. I might have patterns to use gets, and just go ahead and do the same thing here. Okay, so you know, patterns to use gets this whole thing, and each of these is going to be a regular expression. And you know, if I'm going to be using the regular expressions a lot, I might even sort of say something along the lines of no spaces pattern gets, and now I'm going to put the string that's going to get put into my HTML form. I might even emphasize that the string to use for the HTML pattern attribute of the input tag. Okay. So a no spaces pattern might be what we just talked about. And then I could go ahead and here, and this one gets no spaces pattern. And then this might be, I guess I could have a variable called anything if there's no restrictions on it. I might even sort of say put in false. There's my thing here. So either way, no restriction pattern gets star. Okay. Okay, so you might do something like that. You might go ahead and you know, as a programmer, I'm like, yeah, I'd probably want to use false in here, and then have something that my HTML or my PHP that's generating the HTML form says, if it's false, don't even put the pattern attribute in at all. That seems a little bit more proper to me. And you know, I might even want to keep this if if my boss is really classifying of thinking of which inputs can have spaces and which can't, and just a Boolean flag. I might have this, and then have a little function. I might use even the map, array map function or something like that, to have this one be what's in the constants file. And then I go ahead and create this patterns to use, and I'll put that either in the constants file, but I might have it auto-generated from the spaces allowed. I might have a little bit of code that generates patterns to use array from the spaces allowed array. Okay, and the last thing that occurs to me is now that I'm having the regular expressions here, maybe I even want to have regular expressions to use in my browser and the same regular expression that gets used in my server-side validation. And I have to be a little bit careful since we just talked about some of the differences between regular expressions there. But yeah, I like that goal and that minimization, and that helps reduce the chance that the validation that's happening client-side is different than the validation that happens server-side. I like to make those identical when I can. Okay, so those are thoughts on doing things the easy way and just using HTML attributes for your client-side validation. If you have validation that's a little bit more specific, a little bit more involved, you maybe can't get by with that, and you'd have to write your own JavaScript, in which case you probably want to structure it with a validate all and the validate of individual fields. So, okay, have a good morning or afternoon or evening or